Can you hear that? Excellent. Let's try this again. Good afternoon. There we go. And I can't wander. Dang it. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Guile. I am a senior manager with our security assurance team, otherwise sometimes called compliance. I have a couple different teams within my org that I'd be happy to talk with you about certain topics afterwards if you want to pull me aside, or there's other folks from our org and my team here with me. So I have the North America Public Sector Compliance Team, so FedRAMP, DoD, CJIS, a lot of things that, of course, and clearly we're going to talk about here during this session. I have teams for our physical security assessments and our physical security operations center, and the team that does all of our onboarding and security assessments internally as we move them into the different compliance programs and regimes like ISO and PCI and SOC and all those other wonderful programs that we own and operate for you. So if you've got questions about that afterwards, or if you want to pick our team's brains, please feel free to reach out. The overall this conversation is going to go in a couple different directions. One is going to be more focused about our infrastructure and the programs that we operate on behalf of supporting customer workloads, the things that you as customers and partners and agencies are really looking at to build on top of AWS. And then there's the other part which you've been hearing a lot about today and throughout the sessions for the rest of today and in tomorrow about architecting and the different services and how you use them and how you consume them and configure them to use them in compliant and regulated workload environments. So what I'm really going to be looking for also is along the way, if you've got questions you want to ask about, please feel free to stop me along the way. We'll kind of let that feed the direction of the conversation as well. I think that's a little important as we're talking through the different nuances of the programs, all the variables that are involved there. So very much look forward to any questions or comments that you have as we go throughout this, and it'll let us kind of dial this in. And I don't have a slide clicker here. So while that migrates up to the front, so what I'm going to talk about for you guys is our compliance programs and kind of give you an update of where we're at in a couple things. And if you've got questions along the way, again, please feel free. I'm going to talk again about the programs that we have in three primary areas. As you can see on the slide that I have FedRAMP and the programs and everything that we run internally to support that. Our DoD Security Requirements Guide, authorization levels, CJIS, which is law enforcement, workloads. And then when we start getting into the customer space for the other additional workloads and a lot of the standards and requirements in that space, NIST 800-171, some of the DFARS, programmatic requirements in the DoD space, ITAR, some other workloads that you could potentially be running in GovCloud with additional standards and requirements. So as an update as we go through this, is an overview just to make sure that we kind of level set and talk about the programs and the requirements and how they're run and operated and consuming FedRAMP and DoD SRGs for how you would use them for constructing your own authorizations. This really is, the slide is set up to have a look at both environments. And so the programs that we operate from a compliance perspective, every single one of them are all directly attributed to asks and needs from the customer space. So be it the uppermost end of the FedRAMP control baseline to ISO 27001, 9001, our SOC reports, everything that we operate inside of our environment are directly supporting your workloads. And they come as a result of the asks and needs that you have. It's a lot of level of effort as we operate more than 2,200 controls in our infrastructure, and we don't arbitrarily go through that kind of workload without having something to absolutely directly support. And so as we go through this, again, the resources that we provide, the programs that we operate, we actively and eagerly solicit feedback and input on what you guys are looking for, what's needed, what additional resources could you be looking for from us that we could help provide and support you to be more successful in your space. So all the programs we operate, again, are directly supporting your all's workloads. So we still have some conversations around what it means to be operating in a compliant manner within the cloud. So when people see the FedRAMP logo or the fact that we have a DoD authorization in GovCloud or CJIS or any other type of authorization out there, to be absolutely crystal clear does not mean you get to spin up EC2 instances and starting using all the different AWS services and you're automatically covered by FedRAMP or you're automatically covered by DoD or SOC or so on and so forth. You still have the shared responsibility model in play when you're looking at operating services on top of AWS. So that's why, yes, we go through these programs within our infrastructure, but across the top, you still have workloads that you've got to go through and determine applicability of controls. You have to go through audits and assessments and authorization decisions as well within your environment. And it's for all of these different compliance programs. So as an overview with our FedRAMP program, in the GovCloud region, we have a FedRAMP moderate authorization, and you can see the list of services that are covered from our formal assessment. There are another 4 services that have gone through assessment, are ready for consumption. The packages are ready for agencies to take a look at and grant authorizations. We have another set of roadmap of services that are getting ready to go right into the assessment queue following that. So we have a pretty solid pipeline for services that are running through. And again, the prioritization for the services that we're looking to bring through these extensive assessments, be it FedRAMP or HIPAA or these other workloads in GovCloud, again, are coming directly from the needs that you have for the kinds of services and the applications that you're building on top of AWS in support of your services and your customers. So along the same conversation lines of the shared responsibility model, again, it's really taking a look at what is it you're able to achieve within the GovCloud region. We talk about those highly regulated workloads. You've got a foundation and a cloud platform that has gone through all of this level of effort for our authorizations, for the different services that we've brought in scope. And so it is definitely a partnership as we go through in supporting you and as you guys are building services to get these authorizations and certifications on your own. And that's why we really look at this as a partnership. And when you take both of the work that we've done from FedRAMP and DoD and CJIS and ITAR and how we've constructed these programs, and then the customer space, the account space, what you guys are building in terms of applications and services, when you're implementing the right security controls and you're bringing the same security programs in your space that fall in line with the requirements, together that's how you have a holistic boundary for all of these authorizations that you can build within GovCloud region. And not all of, when you look at the list of authorizations and the capabilities or what's possible within GovCloud within the customer space, not all of the requirements that you see on the right side are necessarily falling on the AWS side. So for instance, when we talk about NIST 800-171, which I'll get to near the end of this, you won't see necessarily that we will have some level of authorization around 871 because of the fact that it's a subset of all of the NIST controls found in FedRAMP. But it's still something we make sure we communicate and advocate that you guys, yes, you can be compliant with the control baseline that is NIST 800-171. Or in the case of FERPA, when you get in education type workloads, not directly applicable to the AWS infrastructure, but because of how the platform is run, how it's managed, the authorizations and all the independent assessments that we undergo, that supports and provides a platform that you're able to build FERPA compliant type workloads and so on and so forth across a couple of other different regimes. So again, let's talk about FedRAMP for a little bit. And again, if you've got any questions as we get through the FedRAMP piece, please feel free to raise your hand and stop me along the way. So again, when it comes to our FedRAMP authorization within the GovCloud region, you can see the services that we have within the scope up there, EC2, S3, EBS, and the rest. We do have the question in our FAQ, and we do field the question oftentimes about the ability to use other services outside of our specific list of services, and the answer is still unequivocally yes. If you were sitting in on the FedRAMP panel with Matt Goodrich, the director of FedRAMP, earlier this morning, along with Jennifer Gray, who's on my team, that was one of the questions they brought up to make sure that agency authorizing officials do have the latitude to make those risk-based decisions in granting the use of additional services within their environment. So despite having that list of services, which of course is never intended to remain static, we'll be bringing many more services through the queue as we onboard the priority services. That is not exclusive of the rest of the services that you are able to use within the GovCloud region. So when it comes to consuming authorizations or architecting your authorization strategy for building services within the region, yes, you leverage the FedRAMP ATOs that AWS has gone through. But then as you look at, how do I build this documentation? What are the documentation resources that I have available? What do I need to build in order to get there from a FedRAMP perspective? You can see on the right-hand side of that top block, there are 3 control families that you inherit purely. So when we talk about inherited controls versus shared controls, inherited control families are those that we operate on your behalf. So you can see the 3 control families broken out, and this is all related to the physical environment. So this would be our media protection, how we handle devices, it's around physical environmental. Those are the controls that you explicitly inherit, unless you have a physical environment yourself that you also likewise have to document and construct around. So when it comes to the documentation and the resources that we provide and support you with, there's a lot of programmatics that goes into maintaining our FedRAMP authorization. When it comes to continuous monitoring, we have our own continuous monitoring program that we have to support with authorizing officials. That's another area that you would have to take a look at as you're building out applications and whether or not you're getting a FedRAMP ATO that you have to do continuous monitoring yourself. To support those kinds of authorizations, we have 3 different FedRAMP packages that we provide and make available to our customer base. There is a federal FedRAMP package that is our full package. It has the security assessment plan, the SAP. It has the system security plan, the SSP, and the security assessment report, along with about 14 or 15 other documents to include our plan of actions milestones, or the POAM. That package goes directly to our government authorizing official who's making the assessment. So we get requests for this all the time from a variety of agencies as they are considering applications from partners or from customers like yourselves that are building services on behalf of the government come directly to us and get our full FedRAMP package. So when they look at our package, so they get an understanding of our entire infrastructure and how it's architected, how it's managed and run. Then they look at the partner package or the contractor's package that you've built out with the services. They now have a full holistic view of the operating environment. And then they can see the assessment results side by side for both the infrastructure as well as the application layer. So we provide the government package that they can take a look at, and we supply that directly to the government officials. The second package that we make available to you as partners or customers is a partner package. And it's a more tailored package that is germane to what you need from us. So it gets into an SSP template. So we already provide a pre-populated SSP template with controls that you inherit. So those 3 control families up there are already populated with language from us on how we address those particular controls. And then of course there's several other documents. The SAP is not a part of it, the SSP is not a part of it, nor is the SAR, because again, that is specifically tailored for infrastructure and provided directly to your authorizing official of the government. So at any time you have a government official who is looking for insight to the infrastructure as they're considering an application, they have the ability to come straight directly to us and get a copy of our FedRAMP package. Yes, sir. Question in the front.
Report to as far as their continuous monitoring responsibilities?
Question is, who does AWS report continuous monitoring to as far as our responsibilities? So we engage any authorizing official that requires us to directly report to them for continuous monitoring, but we have a monthly continuous monitoring meeting with HHS, and HHS brings along all of their operating divisions as representatives every month when we meet with the CDC, the FDA, and the NIH, and CMS actually as well. And then we have CONMON meetings with a couple other agencies that have granted authorizations at the agency level. The difference there, and is a couple of different approaches in terms of authorizations, or at least that we've seen from agencies. There are some where they will come absolutely directly to us and get a copy of our package. They will engage us for an agency-wide authorization for the AWS platform. And that by far is probably the most ideal, because then from an agency perspective, it is a one and done prospect, where they're looking at the host or the catalog of AWS services that we provide within our package. and they can say within the agency space, depending upon internal policies or standards or risk posture, they can say unequivocally, if you build applications on top of the AWS environment, you don't need to bring an AWS authorization or worry about engaging them for that because we've already looked at it for the agency-wide. Now that leaves authorizing officials at differing levels within the organization to only focus on the application layer. They only need to look at that mission-specific application or that business-specific application. And in those cases where we have an agency-wide authorization, we will engage with continuous monitoring. Now, that is changing a little bit here going forward, especially when looking at how the scalability of being able to support monthly meetings across the entire federal space. And so we're starting to move towards a consolidated continuous monitoring meeting where we're bringing representatives from all authorizing officials that have an interest in engaging us from a continuous monitoring conversation. And we have an open invitation for that consolidated meeting to bring all reps together to review our package once and for all.
But it's not FedRAMP. FedRAMP is the onboarding process. At that point, you're required to report to the customer.
Yeah, so as we walk through the process, right? So FedRAMP, yes, it's a standardized way of assessing and authorizing a cloud service, right? So we go through the process of getting our 3PO on board. We go through the documentation on our side first off, right? We do our SSP, we do our control applicability, we bring our 3PO inside, we do our formal assessment, we generate a FedRAMP package, and then that gets submitted to, either it can go to the JAB or it can go to an authorizing official agency. And then from there, once an agency, in this case, HHS or other agencies that you can see on the federal website that have granted authorizations, other agencies can leverage those authorizations as a referential data point to say, they've already looked at it, I'm looking at the FedRAMP package from AWS, I'm good, I can make the decision. And then we'll do reporting to the authorizing official upon request and as needed. Yes, ma'am. Sure. So to restate the question was Amazon Inspector, the service that has an agent within your environment that does a lot of compliance-based checks for your service, right, for your images and whatnot, whether that's an explicit part of our package or whether it's going to be onboarded. So that is another one of those services. It's a relatively recent, it was announced at reInvent. We have not taken the service through, but again, here's where you're looking at features within the AWS environment or services within the AWS catalog that don't carry customer data. They don't process or store, the customer-sensitive data. It's looking at a lot of the meta configs within your environment that is pulling. That's how you have, Trusted Advisor or CloudWatch or those kinds of things where you're not looking at the actual data itself, but you're looking at the meta within your environment. Yeah, and so with that, and there's other partner-based services within Amazon Marketplace and elsewhere that are doing a variety of those kinds of checks, where they're looking at known configurations that either you've defined or are being defined based on an external standard, like the CVSS catalog of vulnerability. So if you consume any type of vulnerability scanning, you can take a look at it and say, you're missing these patches or whatnot. But again, that's much in the same way where Trusted Advisor is looking at configurations and telling you, hey, you've got port 22 open to the world. Did you really mean to do this with no password? Or you don't have MFA on your root account. Probably should rethink that. It's really taking that approach. And Inspector is getting a little more in depth. And that's actually owned and operated by another part of the AWS security team. So that's much more, a little more intrusive in terms of having an agent in your environment, but something that you... Yeah, I don't think there's any reason why we wouldn't ever want to address any type of deeper security type tooling with the environment. Certainly. The third FedRAMP package that we have is even further more tailored, more focused on our state and local government stakeholder base. So when we get to state-level governments that may have their own defined security policy but may want to leverage the work that's already been done under FedRAMP, which we see increasingly more and more, and not just within the US, but we see even more internationally, looking at FedRAMP-like models. When we look at the contrast of the CJIS approach versus the FedRAMP approach, wherein CJIS is still, allows for an opportunity to be assessed and audited by every single law enforcement authorizing official in the CJIS environment. So you could be looking at a tremendous scalability issue with 10,000 plus law enforcement organizations across the United States that may want to retain individual audit rights and want to go through this. And of course, you can understand that could portend some significant challenges from having to support that kind of activity on an ongoing basis across our environment. So FedRAMP, which we certainly advocate and point towards in terms of an ideal process, or at least a process that's moving in the ideal direction, is getting to a standardized, centralized process that is known. The control baseline is a known baseline. Everybody understands generally the interpretation levels there of what is necessary to meet those requirements. A standardized approach to how you do the assessments, which is why A2LA and the FedRAMP office have oversight for the accreditation of the 3PAO community, those assessors. And then a set of consistent documentation templates that everybody can expect to be seeing and know where to look for certain information they're looking for. So we definitely look for every chance that we can to leverage the work that we've done from FedRAMP under the 325 moderate controls and the additional controls that will at some point come out under FedRAMP High. So when it comes to state and local government support in this space, we do have a FedRAMP package to support you as you go before state and local, maybe even education institutions in some respects. But we will entertain a different set of documentation that will be able to support a look at our authorization results or assessment results for state and local government agencies. So those are the three primary FedRAMP packages that we provide. And I mentioned the FedRAMP template for the SSP already. We can provide that independent of a FedRAMP package if you so like. And it's not purely the 853 control baseline SSP. It is the FedRAMP baseline for controls, so do bear that in mind. If you're taking that template and you're going to use it with a specific agency that has, FISM requirements, is really looking for your application, looking at the 853 control baseline. Do bear in mind our template is the FedRAMP baseline. Did I see a hand over here somewhere? Question? Nope. Okay, good. And of course, within the FedRAMP or the GovCloud environment, we do have those two distinctions in terms of how we support a lot of these requirements around ITAR, EAR, and things like that. And that is the FIPS 142 endpoints for the region, as well as US person support, both logically and physically. Any questions at all about FedRAMP in the overview? Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that if you have a new service offering for GovCloud, that doesn't necessarily have to go through the entire process again. It can be dependent upon the organization that wants to use that service offering. But isn't it contingent upon multiple agencies requesting that particular service specifically within GovCloud in order for it to become available?
Let me see if I can pull that apart. So the question is, if I can understand this right, you're saying from an agency and a customer perspective to use services not on that list right there and get them authorized for agency use. The second part of that being prioritization of onboarding into GovCloud or prioritization into our FedRAMP program.
Is it going to be on the agency to request authorization from their AO?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Because it's outside of the original FedRAMP package.
Yeah, and not GovCloud specifically, but any service within GovCloud that's not within our FedRAMP package.
Yes.
It is up to that agency to make that determination. So if you've got a service or an application, because again, you're looking at how you are configuring the use of an RDS engine or how you're configuring the use of another service out there. And when you go through the controls that apply to how you're operating it and apply to that service insofar as the control that you have for it, you're documenting the details out in that, you're getting that assessed, and that's a package that's going before an authorizing official that gives them an ability to make a risk-based decision for that.
But Amazon makes the determination on whether to offer that service based on the users of GovCloud to make a determination whether or not they're going to offer it, correct?
So are you talking about pre-existing services within GovCloud or services that are in East, like in other regions that are then being deployed into GovCloud?
Correct.
Yes, and then we're getting into a different business justification or business case conversation about the onboarding of the services into the GovCloud region.
It's still, bottom line is it's still on the agency's AO to make the determination whether or not they can use it when it's offered.
Correct. regardless if it's in our scope or out of our scope. Agencies have that ability to make that determination, yes. Anything else about FedRAMP before I move on? Yes, sir.
If I could just piggyback on that for a little bit. There was a lot of discussion about reciprocity, the ability for an AO to make a decision and determination about an additional service, and then another agency, another CCSA being able to leverage that. Is Amazon thinking about providing a repository, or is there some sort of capability to enable that to occur?
So the question is around reciprocity and whether or not AWS will support some sort of our own repository around authorizations granted on services to help support additional reciprocity.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say from where I'm sitting. If somebody else within the federal or DoD space has a package that's put forward that I could potentially use, how am I going to see it?
Yeah, and so that the nuance there is that if an agency looks at say a partner who's built a service or an application on top of AWS using one of those additional services, the configuration and the management of that service and how that's run and how it's being authorized is specific to that application and that service and how it's being built. So it really is then up to, if another agency knows about that service that's been authorized, it's up to them to take a look at and see, is the authorization for that service, can I leverage that for how it's being used within my environment or my agency? And that's an authorizing decision that has come upon them. But I don't know that we're moving in the direction of building our own repository of those kinds of authorizations to push out there. I'd be interested if there's a more stated business case. I mean, obviously, I'd rather just move the services into scope on our side in the first place. Yes?
Is there any plan to update the actual list of services that are in the original FedRAMP package to include some of the other ones that started to include RDS and some of the other offerings?
Yeah, so what I will not put on that list right now are services that have gone through the assessment process but have not been granted an ATO at some level that we've been engaged for. So, for instance, EMR and Dynamo and the two RDS engines that we've already gone through the assessment, as well as Glacier, that have not been granted an actual authorization yet. Those are not services I'm going to list on the website or FAQ, but knowing that those packages are available as they've gone through the formal assessment with Veris and a final package has been delivered to us. And then, of course, when it comes to the other services in our queue, I have another 4 services that are going into formal assessment, and then another 3 to 4 services that are primed to go into the process after that. Those are the futures based on the timing that I won't get into details of what services are there.
So then based on, this is a DoD question, if the DoD provisional authorization lists the services that are going to be authorized and are going to be signed off, will that be shown on the FedRAMP side saying that for this authorization at an agency level, because I believe that's an agency level now, authorization, the PA, will not affect the original FedRAMP package?
Yeah, and so that's where you get into, now we're trying to step outside the bounds of how FedRAMP is tied to the DoD SRG authorizations from our perspective, right? So from the AWS's infrastructure, your FedRAMP moderate is equivalent to an SRG level 2, right? Just by default, it's done, it's automatic. When FedRAMP High goes live, we'll be curious to see how they make that equivalent tie to, say, L4. So if you've got an agency who has made an authorization for an additional service at the moderate level or outside of that, the question is how DoD may leverage that within their environment. And I think you're again still at the individual departmental AO's call on how that gets authorized. Because now you're talking to still specifically a department or an agency. This is not something that we would take through DISA or the DSOG or anything like that. Yeah, so again, these the programs that we're dealing with here is really focused on the cloud infrastructure perspective, right? The standardization, the centralization of how we do assessments and authorizations for cloud providers does not in any way negate the ability for agencies to authorize the use of any other service within the application space or services that are being built and delivered by partners and customers like yourselves. Last parting questions on FedRAMP. Okay. I've already covered a little bit of ground on this. It's not a lot different just because, like I said, FedRAMP SRG or DoD SRG level 2 is equivalent to our FedRAMP moderate, and so GovCloud is already covered at L2. We've also gone through and got the SRG level 4 authorization as well as soon as it came out when they transitioned from the predecessor cloud security model, which we had, the only level 5 at the time. Now that we're at SRG, we've got the level 4 as we work through additional requirements stepping up to SRG L5. So not a lot different here, except in the cases of when it comes to the DFARS and the requirements that are found there and how we support. And again, this is really getting into the space of the shared responsibility model. So we address all of the DFARS requirements, both in terms of very specific, almost control-like requirements to the programs that are operated to support this space. And so we have a document that we work with customers as we come through this discussion to lay out who has ownership of what aspect within these DFARS requirements. But we absolutely address every single one of the DFARS requirements that are found in those clauses. So that's the one bit of difference here in how we support the customers in our DoD space for GovCloud and others, since we have L2 out in East-West as well. But aside from that, it's really leveraging the FedRAMP authorization and our FedRAMP program, since of course that's what the DoD is doing as well from their perspective for the baseline. Yes.
Notice Redshift is listed up there if you're addressing SRG level 4. As far as what I found on the website, Amazon Redshift is not authorized level 4. It's level 2. Is that still the case?
I'll actually go back and look at that because I know it's level 2 in East-West, but where we've had it in L4, I've got my DoD program manager for this program. I can get back to you for that question specifically, but yeah, it's in scope. Anything else from the DoD slide? CJIS, law enforcement workloads. Here again, it is backstopped by our FedRAMP program, as if you look at the security policy that the FBI CJIS division hosts on their website that is put together by the Advisory Policy Board. There are roughly 133 or so security requirements in the different, I think 12 or 13 families within the security policy. A lot of them are not applicable in our environment when it comes to mobile and Wi-Fi and so on and so forth. But here again is another example where we've got a document that we've authored it and we've had out there for about 2.5 years now, as customers are looking to build a variety of services and applications in the law enforcement space. And of course, I think there's not nearly a day that goes by that there's not some conversation about body-worn cameras, or there's a video of body-worn cameras out there in the space. But that's not the only kind of workload that's out there from a law enforcement agency space. So there's a tremendous amount of other records and evidentiary type supporting applications out there that are operating within GovCloud, leveraging our CJIS work that we've done. So the document that we release and make available to you is almost an SSP-like document. And how it's architected is we've outlined all the security requirements that are found in the security policy, from the very first one to the very last one, regardless of whether it's applicable to our environment or not. And then we have a column that actually goes through and details to varying degrees of detail how we have addressed that particular area, or at least points you back to our FedRAMP program and what the control is that applies to that. But then there's another column in that document that allows you to document your implementation of those requirements within CJIS, so that you can then take that document, treat it as your own security plan, and present that to authorizing officials for your customers in the law enforcement space. And so they get a sense to see, here's AWS's assertion of how they've implemented it, and not only that, but because it's leveraging the FedRAMP program and the work that we do in that space, I know that it's been assessed or audited by an independent assessor, and now I can again look at how the application is configured and run, and how the vendor or the partner has architected law enforcement supporting applications. And it gives them, again, that holistic view of the authorization boundary when they're looking for CJIS workloads. So that's a document we make available. It's actually in editable format that you can go through and put in your control implementation language and use that as a security plan for law enforcement workloads. And again, this is something that we do within the GovCloud region because of the additional requirements and programs that are needed to support CJIS workloads when it comes to background checks and fingerprints and so on and so forth. that we address and we support when it comes to signing the security addendum or the security agreement for CJIS authorizing officials. Any questions here from a CJIS or law enforcement perspective? Nope, good. Well then,
Quick question.
yeah.
Is that just for GovCloud US, or is it covered for the rest of the regions?
Well, so here's the thing about our compliance programs and how we operate our controls in our environment. If you look at the macro level, we don't have any aspect of our environment that is tailored for any one control regime or family. Yes, we have FedRAMP that is applicable to the US-based regions. Yes, we have an ASD certification for our Sydney region. Yes, we've got MTCS level 3 in Sydney and all these other programs that are a little more geographically oriented. But when you look at the controls that are operated, there's no way we could have segregated regions like this and operate this at scale. So everything from a control implementation perspective is done very centralized. Our service teams own all of the implementation of these controls, and so they own them globally. So regardless if you're using Sydney to back up photos on your phone, or you've got the DoD leveraging workloads in US East, they're both seeing the same level of control implementation from the AWS standpoint. So when we talk about the FedRAMP boundary, that is very much a logical, nearly administrative boundary when it comes to where our scope is covering. So when it comes to CJIS, because it is based on FedRAMP controls, which are based on security programs and policies that are operated globally, I can make the extension to say that requirements that you see in CJIS are being addressed insofar as they apply to our region and other regions around the world. And so, of course, when it comes to anything from getting into the Home Office or anything on the UK side, then of course there's a set of requirements we take a look at and see how that can be leveraged against the programs that we already operate, whether there's standalone requirements for assessments and audits and those kinds of things. But insofar as looking at the requirements that you're probably well aware of from the CJIS perspective, they're addressed globally. And so again, from a compliance perspective, it is very much the high watermark that we take when operating our controls inside of our environment. Any other questions or follow-up there? Okay, last couple of slides here real quick. This is getting more into, again, like I mentioned earlier, some of those programs and those requirements that are more focused on the customer space, where they're not either technically applicable to us, that we're having to make some level of assertion or authorization, or they're just already covered by the programs that we already operate in our environment. So if you understand the genesis of where the NIST 800-171 controls came from, when you have contractor networks that weren't previously obligated to a specific control baseline or compliance or certification or authorization, you had networks that were being operated based on best practices or internal corporate policies. And so the government has come down to say, okay, we need a formal control baseline for those kinds of networks. And so that's why you see NIST 800-171 being brought forth in the DFARS and within the DoD spaces. And so we just want to make sure that, we still get the question of, are you NIST 800-171 compliant? Do you address these? Yes, because it is a subset of the NIST 853 controls that we've already addressed within our environment. Again, insofar as they are applicable to the management and maintenance of our infrastructure. And so it's the same conversation from a shared responsibility perspective. You've got to take a look at the controls that are listed within the requirements, determine which of these are actually applicable to your environment, because again, not all of them are going to apply to your service or your application. And then once you've got that determination completed, then you're documenting your implementation, going through the formal assessment audit, and then generating an authorization package to be able to assert actual compliance and an authorizing official granting an ATO. And so throughout all these links too, I hope you notice that there are some URLs in the bottom corners. One is the URL that links back to our actual page where we talk about details of our program, and another one is, in the case of previous slides, actual customers from within that particular compliance framework. So that's NIST 800-171. Any questions about this particular control set? IRS Pub 1075, Federal Tax Information FTI. Again, here we have a question about whether AWS is compliant with 1075. So when you look at the requirements that is found in the publication, it's addressing cloud usage now, right? So you have the memo that documents out, there's a litany of requirements and narrative around the use of FTI within the cloud, but it really gets into some specifics here when it calls out these 8 areas that are mandatory when it comes to using the cloud for FTI. So there's no exclusivity there in terms of not being able to use the cloud. It is when you use the cloud, these are the considerations you must take into account. So first up is you've got to let them know you're going to use the cloud. And so there's a specific time frame and a window by which you have to notify the IRS that you are going to use cloud for FTI. And then it moves into some other both technical as well as procedural or programmatic type requirements. And so what I've put on the far right side is just a quick high-level look at who addresses and who has responsibility for addressing the requirements. So when you go through data isolation, you've already got VPC by default. So you've got that logical segregation already in place for data isolation. Likewise, you still have configuration requirements and obligations within your space when it comes to how you architect data isolation within your environment, be it within, departmentally within an organization, be it network segregation. You still have responsibility from a data isolation perspective. SLAs, I put up there is mostly the customer because that's where you get into the terms and conditions, the enterprise agreements, conversations, but the requirements that they advocate for there are customer driven. Encryption at rest and in transit, again, we both have responsibilities there for how we manage the infrastructure, how we support encryption, server-side encryption to HSMs or our KMS service, our key management service, where you own and manage the key and we don't have access to it. But here's a split responsibility in terms of who's addressing encryption, because you still have an obligation and ability to bring along your own encryption implementations. Data deletion, risk assessments, and security controls. Again, for the rest of these are all shared responsibilities. When it comes to data deletion, you have a level of ability within the AWS services to delete or sanitize your data. And then, of course, we have end-of-life cycle procedures on how we manage and ultimately dispose of hardware within our environment to ensure we don't have unauthorized disclosure of customer data. Backup copies.
The data deletion. If I want to delete data today,
Mm-hmm.
it's active, that you make backup copies.
Yeah, so we don't have, I guess in the sense of the question is, do we handle this for backup copies? We don't do backup copies probably in the sense of the traditional backups, right? We don't have offline storage where we back up things to any type of a store. Everything is live. So you've got varying degrees, and you've got to look through the security and product details for each of the services as to how replication is handled within that service. And there's usually a pretty good narrative around how that's handled from a security perspective and the limitations and the abilities therein. But yes, everything we assert is applicable to any type of, that's how the cloud is run from an availability, from a resiliency perspective in terms of our replication across the architecture. And then risk assessments and security controls. Again, this is back to, you've got to do your own risk assessments within your environment. You've got to make a control applicability and document control implementation, just the same way that we do have to on our side as well. So when it comes to FTI in the cloud, it is absolutely possible. We absolutely support it. There's absolutely a path forward in how you can address those kinds of requirements. And there is going to be a docs forthcoming pretty soon that has a little more detail around this particular workload and in how we support it and the considerations you should take into account when building for IRS Pub 1075 requirements. Any other questions around this particular regime as I'm out of time? Yes, ma'am. Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so absolutely we can. Yeah, and so that's definitely a conversation we can have. I absolutely will stay behind and support that. Yep. So with that, I've really, the last slide I want to make sure you're aware of is just some useful links and an email address. So the links you see on the top end are either our team's web pages, the actual GovCloud team's web page, and our documentation library of all the different white papers and documents that are out there. And then that AWS compliance at Amazon.com email address goes to our team. This goes to the actual security assurance team. So if you've got questions for us or if you've got support, obviously if you've got an account manager or a TAM or or anybody like that from an AWS side, definitely reach out. But if you've got some compliance questions you want to noodle into with us, please reach out. Send us an email that goes direct to our team. And then, of course, there's additional links and resources there. So I want to make sure that you've got availability to some useful resources. So with that, surprisingly, I actually used up all the time and went a little bit over. Any additional questions I can take now, or I can take it offside? If you've got, we've got, again, several folks from our team, from both the GovCloud program management team, from our security assurance team, from the account team. We're more than happy to stay off to the side here and handle any questions you have about the GovCloud region and regulated workloads. And with that, if there's no lasting questions, thanks for your time, thanks for your attendance, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day in Summit.